William Saliba is out injured, and inside one single afternoon, Arsenal's entire defensive plan has been thrown into the air. That is where we start today. Not with history, not with background. Right here, in the middle of a scramble that is touching almost every position on the pitch. A club that just won the Premier League and reached the Champions League final is suddenly being linked with free agents, French centre-backs, Spanish centre-backs, an Argentine World Cup finalist, a Brazilian midfielder valued at a specific internal number, and a teenage French wonder kid. All of this in the same news cycle. This is not a quiet summer. This is a club trying to defend a title while one of its most important defenders is sidelined, and the market is moving fast around them. Here is what is actually at risk. Saliba is not a squad player. He is one half of the partnership that Arsenal's entire defensive identity was built on last season. Losing him even temporarily exposes the club at the exact moment they are trying to prove last season was not a one-off. If Arsenal get this wrong, they risk going into a title defense with a makeshift back line. If they get it right, they turn a moment of vulnerability into a chance to strengthen depth in a position that decides titles. That is the tension running through every single name we are about to go through. Before we go further, if you want this kind of clear-headed breakdown every time Arsenal are in the news, hit that subscribe button now. This channel is built on serious analysis, not noise, and I would rather you hear it here first with the full picture than piece it together from 10 different accounts. Now let's go through this properly, one story at a time. The surprise free agent idea. The first name on the table is John Stones. The framing here is that he has become a free agent, and Arsenal are exploring whether he could be a short-term or squad option to cover the gap left by Saliba's injury. Here is my read on this one. A free transfer for an experienced international centre-back is low risk by definition. There is no transfer fee attached, so the only real cost is wages and squad harmony. What stands out to me is the timing. This idea does not emerge in isolation. It emerges specifically because Saliba is out. That tells you Arsenal are not panicking into the market for a marquee statement signing. They are patching a specific hole with a specific low-cost option. That is a controlled response, not a reactive one, and it is worth remembering that distinction as we go through the rest of these stories. I also want you to notice the word surprise attached to this particular idea. This is not the kind of move that builds for months with heavy speculation. It is the type of option that surfaces quietly, gets weighed internally, and either advances or fades without much fuss. The fact that it is being floated at all tells you the club is widening its search radius rather than fixating on one obvious answer. That is exactly what a real injury situation looks like behind the scenes. Not panic, but a broader net being cast while the coaching staff waits to see how long Saliba is actually going to be out for. The Lacroix race. With Chelsea next, Arsenal have reportedly joined Chelsea in pursuing Crystal Palace's Maxence Lacroix, with Palace's valuation said to have climbed as high as £60 million. My analysis here is simple. When two London clubs are chasing the same defender from a domestic rival, the price only moves in one direction, and that is upward. Crystal Palace know they are dealing with two clubs who both have Champions League ambitions and financial strength. That gives them leverage, and it explains why the number has apparently climbed rather than settled. If Arsenal are serious about Lacroix, the real story to watch is not whether they want him, it is whether they are willing to keep pace with Chelsea in a bidding scenario that Palace clearly have no incentive to end quickly. There is also a competitive layer worth pointing out here. Every pound Arsenal spend chasing Chelsea in this particular race is a pound that cannot be spent elsewhere on the list we are about to go through, whether that is Konsa, Martin, or any of the attacking options further down this breakdown. Selling clubs understand this dynamic perfectly well, which is exactly why asking prices tend to rise rather than fall once two direct rivals enter the same conversation publicly. Palace have very little reason to negotiate quickly while that competitive tension is working in their favour. Konsa and the backup plan. The third story brings in Aston Villa's Ezri Konsa as what is described as a prime target directly linked to Saliba's back injury, with the added detail that Konsa's versatility allows him to cover centre-back and right-back. A second name, Real Sociedad's John Martin, is also mentioned as part of a wider list of defensive options being considered. What I find most telling here is the word versatility. Arsenal are not just looking for a like-for-like replacement for one position. They are looking for players who solve more than one problem at once. A centre-back who can also play right-back gives a manager flexibility across multiple match days, especially in a season that will include Premier League fixtures and a Champions League defence. The presence of a second name, John Martin, on the same list tells you this is not a one-horse race internally. Arsenal are building a shortlist, not fixating on a single target, which again points to a measured recruitment process rather than a desperate one. The Gabriel Jesus valuation standoff. Here the direction shifts from incoming to outgoing. Arsenal may need to lower their £20 million valuation of Gabriel Jesus to accommodate interest from AC Milan. But the key detail is that Arsenal are not under pressure to sell and could simply refuse to let him go rather than accept a reduced fee. This is where I want to be precise, because this is not a confirmed departure. This is a valuation gap. Arsenal have set a number, Milan appear unwilling or unable to meet it, and Arsenal are comfortable walking away entirely if that gap does not close. That is a position of strength, not weakness. A club under financial pressure lowers its price. A club that says it would rather keep the player than lower the price is telling you they see continued value in him, whether as a squad option or a genuine rotation piece. Do not read this as Gabriel Jesus being on his way out. Read it as Arsenal holding a line, the Julian Alvarez pursuit now to one of the bigger names in this entire cycle. Arsenal are said to be ready to go all out for Atletico Madrid's Julian Alvarez, with the club's sporting director personally pushing to convince him to join. Atletico are described as adamant they will not sell below a valuation of €150 million, which converts to roughly £128 million. But there is a suggestion Atletico may prefer selling to a club outside Spain, rather than to Barcelona or Real Madrid. I want to flag clearly that this is presented as a rumour, sourced from reports out of Spain, and it should be treated as exactly that. What makes it interesting from an analytical standpoint is the psychology of the selling club. Atletico Madrid apparently do not want to strengthen a direct domestic rival. If that detail holds up, it actually works in Arsenal's favour, because it removes two of the biggest financial competitors from serious contention and leaves the door open for a club willing to match the fee from outside Spain. That is a significant number regardless of who ends up paying it, and it tells you Atletico see Alvarez as one of the most valuable attacking assets in European football right now. The Bruno Guimaraes ceiling. This next one is about Bruno Guimaraes, and the framing is very specific. Arsenal reportedly have an internal financial valuation set for him. If a deal can be completed at that number, they will pursue it. If it cannot, they will turn to other targets. This is a disciplined stance, and I think it is worth pausing on. Clubs that chase every target regardless of price end up either overpaying or destabilizing their own wage structure. Setting a hard internal ceiling and being willing to walk away if it is not met is exactly the kind of recruitment discipline that separates sustainable rebuilds from reckless spending sprees. Whether or not this particular deal happens, the approach described here is the more important story. The contradiction emerges here is where things get genuinely interesting, because the very next piece of information directly contradicts the one before it. Arsenal are reported to have cooled their interest in Bruno Guimaraes entirely, with a claim that the club had stepped back from the pursuit after being accused of unsettling the player. Newcastle's position is described as unchanged, insisting he is not for sale, with no formal Arsenal bid having been submitted. I want to be very transparent with you here. These two stories cannot both be fully accurate at the same time in the same way. One version has Arsenal actively working toward a valuation-based deal. The other has Arsenal stepping back entirely. What this tells us as analysts is that the Guimaraes situation is genuinely unsettled and contested, even among those reporting on it. My advice and the responsible way to view this is to treat the entire Guimaraes storyline as unresolved. No formal bid has been confirmed, Newcastle's stance has not changed, and until one of these narratives is confirmed by the club itself, or by the players' actions, we should hold both versions loosely rather than presenting either as settled fact. This is actually a useful moment to talk about how transfer coverage works during a busy window. Multiple outlets often have relationships with different people close to a negotiation, an agent, a club insider, a source close to the player, and each of those relationships can produce a different snapshot of the same situation at slightly different moments in time. A club stepping back from active pursuit at one point does not rule out that same club returning to the table 2 or 3 weeks later if circumstances change, and a firm denial from a selling club does not always mean interest from a buying club has disappeared completely. The responsible thing to do as an analyst is not to pick the version that sounds more exciting. It is to flag the contradiction clearly, which is exactly what I am doing here, and wait for something firmer before treating either outcome as decided. The Berta and Kroenke framework moving on, we get a broader structural detail. The club's sporting director is described as leading the overall recruitment process, while ultimate financial backing is described as coming from ownership. The framing adds that as reigning Premier League champions and Champions League runners-up, the ambition is to target genuinely top-class players. What this tells me is about structure, not specific names. Recruitment decisions are being centralized through one sporting director, with ownership providing the financial platform behind him. That is a fairly standard modern football operating model, but it matters here because it explains why we are seeing so many parallel storylines. A centralized recruitment structure typically means several targets are being evaluated simultaneously across different scenarios, which is exactly the pattern we have seen across every story so far today. The no panic doctrine. This next one is important because it directly addresses how the club is reacting to setbacks. Arsenal are described as having set strict internal valuation limits for every target this summer, and are described as fully aware that if they are not prepared to meet a required figure, a target may simply go elsewhere. The specific example given is that Arsenal were informed in advance that Morgan Rogers was heading toward Chelsea, and there was no sense of panic inside the club when that happened. This is, in my view, the single most revealing piece of information in this entire cycle. It confirms that Arsenal's recruitment approach is built around discipline rather than emotional reaction. Losing out on a genuine target to a rival is never a good outcome on its own, but the described reaction, calm rather than panicked, suggests a club operating with a clear internal process, rather than one making decisions under public pressure. That composure is the thread that connects almost every other story we have covered today, from the Gabriel Jesus valuation standoff to the Bruno Guimaraes ceiling. The lighter moment, away from the transfer noise for a second, Gabriel Magalhaes was back in his home country of Brazil, taking part in a special exhibition match, and he got on the score sheet during that appearance. This one is not a transfer story at all, it is simply a personal moment for the player, but I think it is worth including because it is a reminder that behind every valuation number and every reported target, these are real players living real lives outside the market speculation. It is a nice human beat in an otherwise intense news cycle. The Svensson scrap with Liverpool. Finally, we have a report that both Liverpool and Arsenal are prepared to go head-to-head for Borussia Dortmund's left-back Daniel Svensson, with a valuation that could reach as much as €50 million. My take here is that this is the clearest domestic rivalry angle in the entire batch of stories today. When your title rival is chasing the exact same player at the exact same position, that tells you two things. First, that the player is rated highly enough that two of England's biggest clubs see him as a genuine upgrade. Second, that whichever club wins this race gains a direct edge over the other heading into the new season, not just in terms of the player himself, but in terms of denying a direct competitor the same reinforcement. This is a storyline worth watching closely purely because of who else is involved. The wider reporting. The Alvarez situation, confirmed. As ongoing beyond the initial rumour, further reporting adds detail to the Alvarez situation. Arsenal are described as keeping close watch on his circumstances at Atletico Madrid, alongside interest from Barcelona, but neither Spanish club has been able to agree a deal with Atletico so far. The specific detail added here is that Arsenal's interest would become live only if there is a breakdown in the relationship between the player and his current club, potentially opening a path in August. My analysis is that this is a patient, conditional interest, not an active pursuit. Arsenal are not bidding right now. They are positioned and ready if circumstances change. That is a smart way to track a valuable target without committing resources to a deal that Atletico currently have no interest in doing. Alvarez's production last season, close to 30 goal contributions, explains exactly why a club in Arsenal's position would want to be first in line if the door opens, even if that door is currently closed. The Boadi race with Manchester City. The next major storyline involves 18-year-old Lille midfielder Ayoub Boadi, who is attracting interest from both Arsenal and Manchester City, following a standout World Cup performance for Morocco. Here is what stands out to me. When two clubs of this stature are chasing an 18-year-old at the same time, it is rarely about the immediate season alone. It is about long-term profile. Boadi is being talked about as an upgrade option in central midfield, someone who brings physicality, control, and composure. The fact that Manchester City are also in this race tells you the player's ceiling is rated extremely highly across the league, not just by one club's scouting department. For Arsenal, the real question is not whether he fits stylistically. The reporting suggests he clearly does, but whether they can convince an elite prospect to choose them over a club with City's recent trophy history. That is the actual competition here, not just the transfer fee. There is a squad context worth adding too. A player of this profile is described as a potential upgrade in a specific central role currently occupied by an established squad member. That framing tells you this is not being treated as a depth signing or a future prospect to be loaned out and forgotten. If Arsenal do win this race, the expectation attached to him from day one will be real playing time, not a slow introduction on the fringes of the squad. The Rodgers fallout and the pivot. Finally, we come to the story that ties several threads together. Chelsea have moved decisively to secure Morgan Rogers, agreeing what is described as a British transfer record package worth around £117 million, with Rodgers expected to sign a 6-year contract, including an option for a further season. This was reportedly one of Mikel Arteta's leading targets, and losing that race forces a rethink in one specific area: a young attacker capable of scoring goals, carrying the ball under pressure, and playing across more than one position. Two alternatives are named as being under consideration. Bournemouth's Eli Junior Krupi, a player who scored 13 league goals last season and has already caused problems for Arsenal directly on the pitch, though Bournemouth are described as determined to keep hold of him, with valuations reportedly ranging from around £80 million up to closer to £100 million depending on the source. And Paris Saint-Germain's Bradley Barcola, who would offer more natural width and pace from the left, though his club's contract situation remains unresolved, and Liverpool are also described as seriously interested. Here is my honest analysis of this situation. Missing out on a genuine top target is never a neutral outcome, but the bigger risk now is overcorrection. Spending close to £100 million on a 20-year-old purely as a reaction to losing out on Rodgers would only make sense if Arsenal view that player as a guaranteed long-term starter, not a consolation option. Barcola may actually suit the immediate tactical need better, given the description of him as a specialist width and pace option, but his valuation and the presence of Liverpool as a competing suitor mean that deal carries its own complications too. The most sensible path, and the one that lines up with everything we have already seen in Arsenal's approach to Gabriel Jesus, to Bruno Guimaraes, and to the calm reaction described around losing Rodgers in the first place, is to set a firm valuation for both alternatives and be fully prepared to walk away from either if the numbers do not work. That is not a passive approach, that is a controlled one. And based on everything we have gone through today, control appears to be the defining theme of Arsenal's entire summer, not panic and not desperation. So here is where things stand. A defensive injury has opened the door to multiple centre-back conversations, from a free agent option in Stones, to a contested race for Lacroix, to a shortlist built around Konsa and Martin. A midfield valuation ceiling is either being pursued or has been abandoned entirely, depending on which version of the Bruno Guimaraes story proves accurate, and I have been honest with you that both cannot be true at once. A striker's price is being held firm rather than discounted, which tells you Arsenal see continued value in Gabriel Jesus regardless of Milan's interest. A world-class forward in Julian Alvarez is being tracked patiently rather than chased actively, with the door only opening if his situation at Atletico changes. An 18-year-old midfielder in Boadi is being courted against one of the most powerful clubs in the world. A left-back race with Liverpool is shaping up over Svensson. And an attacking miss to a direct rival in Rodgers has opened up two very different paths forward in Krupi and Barcola, neither of which should be rushed into. If today's breakdown helped you see the full picture more clearly, make sure you are subscribed, because this window is only going to move faster from here, and I will be breaking down every confirmed step and every unresolved rumour exactly like this, with the facts kept separate from the speculation every single time. I will see you in the next one.